Great. So my name is Elaine Chang. I'm the Senior Manager for Global Market Development here at Terre Works, and thank you all so much for joining us. It might be a surprise for me to say, since we're a mobile technology company, but a big mistake that we've seen is for organizations to think of mobile technology as a magic solution to their day-to-day operations or impact monitoring. Definitely, mobile tools have the ability to help achieve your goals, but no matter what technology you plan to implement in your organization, if nobody uses it, then it's not really successful. But obviously, there are lots of success stories of organizations using mobile technology in the field, and so we wanted to share the best practices that we've seen. So today, we're joined by Erin Yamaoka, who's our Technical Account Manager, as she shares her ABCs of successful mobile data adoption that she's seen from across her years of experience managing implementations. So before we start, I'm going to launch a poll to gauge where our audience is with this as I go through some housekeeping items. So let me just launch that poll now. If you wouldn't mind putting in what stage of implementing a mobile tool you might be in. Okay, so great. So in terms of housekeeping items, everyone is on mute automatically, and this is being recorded. So just judging by who is on the call, I imagine that there might be some good learnings out there that we'd love to hear, or at least some questions. So we'll try pausing after the main topics for questions or other stories. To ask your question, you can either raise your hand and I can unmute you. When I do that, please introduce yourself. Or you can type your question into the chat window and I'll sort of moderate that. Cool, so I'm just going to close this poll. Oh, very interesting. So it's exactly 50-50, it looks like. Half of you are planning to implement a tool in the next 6 months, and some of you have already implemented a tool. So that is great. I think what we'll do is try to get some of these stories of if you've already implemented a tool. What are some learnings? Try to get that out. Okay, great. So let me hide that and see. Hopefully you can see Erin's screen again. Great. I'm going to turn it over to Erin now.
Okay, great. Thanks, Elaine. Can you hear me okay, Elaine?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. So thanks everyone for joining. Today we're going to talk about strategies for ensuring field staff adoption of mobile technologies. We actually had this discussion at the ICT 4D conference in Nairobi last week. It was a really great conversation. And hopefully we're kind of trying an experiment with this webinar in that we're hoping for a little bit more audience engagement. The information we're sharing today is essentially crowdsourcing our experiences with our customers, but we love to hear your learnings as well. So we'll start with introductions. We'll briefly talk about what a typical Terre Works implementation looks like, and then go into our learnings. And then hopefully there'll be plenty of time at the end for a discussion. So again, my name is Erin Yamaoka. I'm the Technical Account Manager at Terre Works. It's a really bad photo of one of my superstar classes in Nigeria. But the reason I'm talking about this today is that I'm on our customer services and professional support teams. So I assist our customers with the end user training of our application and also do train the trainer trainings. And then additionally, I help our customers troubleshooting issues from the field. So through that process and those experiences, we wanted to share some of the learnings we've seen across our implementations. And for those of you on the call who aren't familiar with Terre Works, Terre Works is a technology company that was incubated at Grameen Foundation. Our application was originally born out of an internal need for Grameen Foundation products across the world and for M&E, but then we realized there are other organizations that could use the technology as well, so we became our own company last year, and we're still a wholly owned subsidiary of Grameen Foundation. We have a presence in the United States. I am based in Kampala, Uganda, and we also have team members in Kenya, and then also development happening in Poland and India. And as a team, our goal at Terre Works is to improve product and service delivery to the last mile by bringing real-time data to any organization anywhere. Just to briefly give you an overview, super high-level overview of our product. Essentially, our application enables organizations to manage their operations in remote places with no access to network. So what this looks like is a Salesforce.com database in the cloud on the back end and an Android application on the front end. In the back end, you might do activities like building what we call jobs, which is the highest level unit of work you can have in Terre Works, which may consist of exposing data out of the database or creating forms or surveys to collect data as well. And those jobs will get pushed out to the device, and the field officer or the mobile user can use those jobs to do their work in the field. And when they're back with access to network, they can sync all of that data or information about the work they did back into Salesforce. At that point, the data is centralized to a place in the cloud, so the entire organization has visibility and real-time information to make operational and strategic business decisions. So if you have more information or have more questions or interest in our product, at the end of the webinar we'll display some contact information. Feel free to follow up with us for more information. So our implementation approach, at a high level, these are the tasks that we typically go through. It's probably similar to other technology implementations. Essentially, we're gathering requirements, building, testing, and deploying. But from a Terre Works perspective, we're starting off by defining what the customer's goals are with the product. So why are you implementing this mobile technology? What are the major KPIs, reports, and dashboards that you're going to want at the end of this implementation to be able to improve your organizational processes? Then we would go through and walk through what a mobile user's processes look like in the field. That helps us to delineate between creating distinct jobs. And then we create objects and fields, or essentially design the database. We then create jobs and surveys that would work with that database, and then reports and dashboards that would aggregate the data from the field. We then do testing and then bring in any data that would be needed for setup, geographical data, data from other systems, and then create the users, the user accounts that the field staff will be using in the field, and then do the training. Then typically our customers will pilot the jobs and will incorporate the feedback from that pilot. So the pertinent tasks here that are informing the information that we're sharing today are essentially training the field staff and also the incorporation of the feedback. So seeing how this implementation process can be improved to increase the mobile user adoption of the product. And also I'd like to note that our level of engagement with different Terre Works customers is sometimes we're engaged to do a full preparation for a full pilot. Some of our customers do everything on their own, and we're just there to support them if they have any questions. So our participation level and role varies a lot across our customer base. So out of those experiences, what are the learnings that we've found? And when I very first sat down to compile observations from our super successful customers to our customers that struggled more at the beginning with mobile user adoption, there was a theme of three, what I'm calling adoption enemies: fear, frustration, and distrust. And a lot of the learnings and lessons that we've compiled into different categories all came back to combating one or more of these three things. So I don't think this is necessarily unique to our context or to remote field staff. As I said, we attended the ICT4D conference last week, and despite it being a technology conference, I think I saw plenty of these types of emotions when presenters were going up and maybe cables would fail or the display wasn't compatible with their laptop, or people had to swap out or borrow laptops from other people that were Macs versus PCs or vice versa, and you could definitely see the fear, frustration, and distrust across all over their face. And these are people that are, giving talks and speaking about technology. So I don't think that these emotions or these adoption enemies are unique to our field staff, but some of the strategies or the ways to combat these might be. So we've grouped them into 5 major categories. We're calling the ABCs of mobile adoption. The first is accountability. Second is buy-in, capacity building, device selection, and established support processes. I'd probably argue that capacity building is probably the most important of the 5, but we'll walk through some tips and tricks or things that we've learned about each category. As we go through, again, if you have any experiences you'd like to share within these categories as we go through, or at the end, lessons you've learned, we'd love to hear from you. So starting with accountability, the focus of this conversation is around field staff adoption, but we're going to talk about accountability on 2 different levels. The first is at a more management or ownership level, and the second is the field staff level. The reason I'm bringing this up, despite the topic of the conversation, is that without the accountability on the management level, your accountability at a field staff level is almost a moot point. So some challenges we've faced, ironically, or I think counterintuitively when it comes to accountability, isn't necessarily that there aren't enough stakeholders, there's not enough of a quorum around the technology, but that maybe there were too many players or too many stakeholders, and that it's really easier to be successful, or it's more efficient to have a single point of ownership over the mobile technology. We did an implementation last year where we were dealing with a consortium of organizations rather than a single organization. I think that just created more complications around the accountability of the implementation and the success of the mobile technology. And then we have other customers where we have had that single point of ownership, and we've seen or observed particular characteristics around those owners that have been successful. One is being a champion of the technology. So somebody who's excited about it, understands it, and really has a vested interest in it succeeding and providing value to the organization. Another is being able to understand and communicate its value. And I think the second piece is a little more rare. So I think Terre Works was, or at least in our context for our mobile technology, Terre Works was built to be easy to use and hopefully easy to understand, especially on the field staff level. So when we're introducing our product to potential owners, I think it's fairly easy to understand, especially when we're dealing with people that are excited about technology. They can see the potential, the value, and kind of like visualize how the implementation would work and what it's going to look like when it's applied to their business. So I think the first half of that is less common, or is common, but the second half is equally or more important and less common, and that's being able to communicate that value. So can that person or can that owner interact with people at all levels of the company, different stakeholders and users, and make them understand why it's important. And then lastly, ideally that person was that owner was a part of the product selection process. So we've engaged with a couple of customers recently where there's been essentially like a task force to go out and find out what mobile technology is going to meet their needs and their requirements, and they do an excellent job of that because they end up choosing Terre Works. Just kidding. But then once it comes time to actually implement, that initiative is essentially handed off to someone different. So essentially, there's that task force is telling a different individual that wasn't a part of that product selection process, please go implement this and make this successful in the field. And I think that there can be some miscommunications in that process, and inherently that person that's the product is being handed to is not going to have not going to be as invested in the success of the technology as if they were part of that decision-making process. Okay, so once you have accountability on a management or owner level, I think accountability on the field staff level is also provided success for our customers. So creating measurable and achievable goals for your field staff. And from a Terre Works perspective, we have a performance module that allows you to be very transparent with what the expectations are with the field officer or the mobile user. So you can set up goals on a weekly or monthly basis, and they can see their progress on the against those goals. And then to the second half of that, making them achievable. One thing that you may want to consider, we've seen done, is maybe laxing what the expectations of a mobile user would have been pre implementation for the immediate pilot or post-implementation. So for example, if previously your mobile user or field staff was expected to register 10 farmers a week, maybe on the onset of your implementation, you lax that to 8, with the consideration that they're having to learn potentially new hardware, new technology, and potentially new processes as well to achieve the same goals. So, or at least guarding against, I think it's easy, sitting in office and being more on the ownership or management side of things to think, okay, we're implementing mobile tech, things are going to be more efficient, more effective, so we can increase our expectations of our field staff. And I think that is definitely true. I would just advise doing that in a phased process such that your field staff can gain confidence and a sense of achievement and accountability towards the implementation of the mobile technologies successfully. Yeah, so those were our thoughts and observations around accountability. Does anybody else have anything they'd like to share or questions they'd like to ask? If not, we can keep moving through, but don't be shy. Feel free to write down some things or stories that you'd like to share if you have some best practices that the rest of the group can benefit from.
I don't see any hands or questions, Erin.
Sorry, what was that, Ellie?
I don't see any hands or questions at this point, so maybe let's go through and then hopefully this will get people's juices flowing for the Q&A at the end.
Sounds great. Okay, so the next category is B for buy. So creating buy-in with your field staff in a number of different ways helps with the success of the technology. The first is communication. So again, kind of ties back to a successful owner is going to be able to do this well, but being able to communicate how the mobile user is going to benefit. Is this going to make your job easier? Is your work going to be more transparently shared with the rest of the organization? Are you going to be able to be more effective or have greater impact? And then also sometimes over the longer term, this means an increase in responsibility for the mobile user because the tech is allowing them to be more efficient. So to kind of still maintain buy-in to counter that, explaining how the organization is going to benefit. So, by using this tool, we are going to be able to reach so many more users or end clients, or essentially the larger picture purpose of why the technology is important. And then also communicating a mechanism for continuous improvement. So 9 times out of 10, you are not going to roll out a technology and have everything be perfect in the eyes of everyone. Hopefully there is feedback and improvements that people want to make, and I think communicating on the onset that what we're handing you today to go out and either pilot or do your job is not the be-all end-all. This isn't set in stone. It's not cement. We can make changements and improvements on it. And with Terre Works, you can iterate pretty quickly and easily as far as pushing out new jobs to the field or making changes to the jobs that you've already implemented. So that piece of communication to set the expectation that you are expected to provide us feedback and improvements, and this is the way that you do it. What is that mechanism for continuous improvement and input that your field staff can have on the betterment of the technology? Also important for buy-in, not always possible at every level, but having the voice of the mobile user present at each stage is ideal. So obviously requirements definition, having a field staff member who's actually going to use the product tell you what their needs are in the field, having them participate in testing such that they're giving that initial feedback on improvement of the product. And also I think it's especially pertinent to have, if you can, have field staff actually conducting the training of the other mobile users. So I think this is beneficial on a couple different levels. One, I think it's easier to be told how to do something or taught how to do something if the person's coming from the context of knowing your job and knowing your realities of your work in the field. Another is that they can provide more contextualized training. So for example, maybe someone who, me, a Terre Works implementer, might not know the nuances of the field staff's interaction in a particular organization. So maybe by giving that person the capacity to train on Terre Works, they can provide information around the challenges that they face in the field. For example, maybe if your field staff registers farmers, but they're actually not registering them at their homes, it's a local meeting spot, and one of the questions is to provide your national ID number. But maybe oftentimes people don't know it and they don't have their IDs on them. And so they might have to go home and get them and come back. Maybe knowing that, field staff who's doing the training of the other mobile users can talk about that scenario and show the Terre Works functionality and how you would do that. This is how you would save a job for later to come back to it when the person comes back to the meeting point, as an example. But I think training can be more successful when the person who's actually going to be using the mobile tech is the one doing the training of the other mobile users. Also, obviously, piloting helps with buy-in because you're shaking out and improving the product before it's being released en masse to a larger audience. And the same argument can be made for a phased rollout. So I'm essentially just against a big bang rollout. We had a customer do an implementation last year based on country, and they chose to start with their most challenging country, which I've heard some different feedback about whether or not you should start with maybe your easiest environment, context, or user group versus your most challenging, but I think it worked out really well for them, actually. So the first implementation country, they got a lot of feedback. They made a lot of changes and corrections to data, things like that. But then by the time they were at their second, third, fourth country, there was little to no feedback and everything was running smoothly. So obviously a phased rollout increases buy-in for the non-guinea pig, essentially, mobile users because they'll face less issues. Are there any questions or feedback based on your experiences with buy-in? Okay, I'm not seeing any questions. Elaine,
Nope, I don't see any either.
Okay. Great, so that was some of our learnings around buy-in. The third is, or C is for capacity building, and as I said before, I think this is arguably the most important piece, and something I've really learned a lot about in this position with Terre Works. I don't know if anybody from Troker is on the call, but I learned a lot from that customer about this arena. So I came from the private sector consulting, and I really had to take a step back to think about how we should adjust our training when we're doing end-user training with mobile users that have never seen a smartphone before. So the first bullet point, training on the usage of the hardware first. So before we can even talk about Terre Works or talk about how you're going to use this mobile technology to do your job, doing really basic trainings about the hardware and making sure people feel comfortable with the device first is advisable. So how do you power it off and power it on? What are best practices around conserving battery while you're in the field? What's the difference between turning a phone completely off versus putting it to sleep? How do I get data? So how do you connect to a wireless network? How do you turn on mobile data? How do you top up in different countries and different contexts? Um, Things of this nature. So training on the hardware first. Then practicing skills that are not only needed for the immediate pilot, but also considering future expansion. So from a Terre Works perspective, we have a lot of different what we call question types when you're doing a survey that are each different interactions when it comes to how you're inputting information to the mobile device. So for example, a text field would bring up a keyboard, and a GPS question would require you to capture coordinates in a different way than entering text. So rather than just jumping to the jobs the field officer is actually going to use in the field for the pilot or the immediate implementation, it's been useful to create a job that will go through each one of these types of interactions in a generic way. So even if you're not on the onset scanning a barcode or using a QR codes or taking photos or capturing signatures, going through that in the training in a generic way helps you to prepare your field staff for rolling out changes in the future. So you're not limited and you don't need to bring everyone back in from the field, which is expensive and a logistical challenge, just to roll out or expand your Terre Works functionality or your usage of your whatever your mobile tech is. The next, I think, is particularly important for combating frustration and fear of in your mobile field staff, and that's practicing troubleshooting common issues. So there's undoubtedly issues when you're into the field, regardless of the tech. Maybe from a Terre Works perspective, when you're trying to sync, there's no access to network, or maybe you're running low on battery and so the GPS coordinates aren't being captured. Whatever common issues there may be, if you can actually throw these in your capacity building setting or in your training session and have your users practice getting through them on their own, that can really help mitigate the negative feelings they'll have around the tech when they're facing them in the field. Also, there's one thing to be said, sitting in a classroom setting and you're clicking through the application together and everyone's, sitting in their seat facing maybe a screen where you're all walking it through it at once versus practicing in a role-playing scenario. So actually practicing using the tech in the context of your work. So that's where using a real job that you use in the field comes into play, and actually having another person in the class who does the same work in the field simulate what that job would be like. So interviewing the person or providing data to be captured. And then another thing I learned, this was something I learned from Trocro, is practicing role-playing with focus on soft skills. So a mentor of mine when in another life when I implemented ERP systems had told me that if there is an organization who has issues with people or processes, adding technology to it or on top of it is only going to magnify those issues. And it's very easy for the tech to be blamed when it comes to timing. So I think it's important to role play with focus on any issues that may come up in the field that maybe aren't focused on the hardware or the software or the mobile tech that you're implementing. So training your field officers on what you're going to do if the person is resisting having their photo taken or doesn't want to participate in the survey, or how you're going to hold the phone when you're asking for their signature. Going through like that role play again, but also going through skills that aren't unique to the technology, because any fear, frustration, or distrust that's going to come up in the field after your mobile tech implementation could be chalked up to that technology, which you want to mitigate as much as possible. And those were our thoughts on capacity building. Does anybody have anything else they want to add?
We have one question from Erica from Soil. So she asked, do you have any resources to share on these topics?
Sure. So we can make this deck available for sharing, as well as when we conduct trainings on Terre Works specifically. That's what most of our resources are about, are the capacity building around training for our application. So when we do engage in training with our customers, we give them all of those materials to reuse on their own. Yeah, Elaine, I don't know if you can think of anything else we might have to share.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, TerraWorks also provides professional services and goes through a lot of this training too. So we have kind of a curriculum. So we could, when we train, that's what we do. But I don't know, maybe we can connect offline, Erica, about any specific resources.
That you're looking for, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. She says, great, thanks.
Great, thanks for the question. Anyone else? Questions, comments, things you'd like to share from your learnings? Okay. So move on to D, device selection. So this is a category where we don't see the issue come up very often when it comes to field staff adoption, but when we do, it's pretty bad. This is one that when it hits hard. So what we'd recommend is field testing devices before committing to a large purchase. So, sitting in an office and going through your technology on an app or a device you're considering purchasing may not shake out some issues that would be faced in the field. So, some issues we've seen, weather conditions can play a role, so how well the device handles dust or sun. I've seen tablets taken out in the middle of the day under noon sun and rendered almost not usable because the glare is so bad. Battery life is also an issue we've seen customers have with certain products, which can be supplemented with like a solar external battery charger. But just taking the device through what the day in the life of your field officer looks like is a good way to test that. And then also communication. So I think in this day and age, most, I think it's easy to assume that an Android device you're looking at is going to come with all the communications features that you would expect, but we have seen customers accidentally purchase devices that don't have GPS or aren't SIM card enabled, things like that. So that one I'll be looking at with a field test of your devices. Another piece of feedback or an insight we've gotten from a customer in Central America is that a consideration they had when doing their device selection was security for their field staff. So carrying around a big flashy tablet in the communities that they work in was considered a security risk for their staff. So that might be another consideration. And then finally, not skimping on any add-ons, especially when it comes to anything associated with memory. So SD cards could host the data that you're using or your field staff is generating in the field. And if something goes wrong with that, that could lead to data loss, which is the ultimate fear when it comes to generating distrust in your field staff and the adoption of the mobile technology. So definitely ensuring that you're not skipping on SD cards, and also you can purchase chargers cheap chargers that can have a negative impact on the battery life of your device. I think some of the general discussion I took away from our conversation with attendees at the ICT4D conference was that it can be difficult to get your organization to invest in good hardware. Some feedback we've gotten, we're all working on probably lean organizations on limited budgets, but I think the general consensus of the group was that we should prove out to that management that's pushing us or challenging us on the financial piece to prove out that it's more expensive when your device goes bad. So the cost of bringing bad devices in from the field, having to replace them, the cost of data loss, having to redo that field officer have to redo their work because you didn't purchase a good device. So those were our observations around D for device selection. Does anybody on the phone have any devices that they'd highly recommend or devices that they'd see or rather the rest of us avoid? Okay. This is definitely, sorry, what was that, Elaine?
I was just going to say I don't see any responses, but I also want to jump in and say like I've also heard of really kind of understanding if you're asking a lot of qualitative information like open-ended questions, it's a lot easier to maybe type with a tablet versus kind of a tiny phone keyboard. And I think that's, kind of goes into the whole getting feedback from the field staff themselves. Like if they're trying to type it in and they see issues, then take that into consideration for device selection as well.
Yep, sounds great. Okay, last one, E is for established support processes. So again, this can help mitigate fear and frustration in the field. So one recommendation, although we're a mobile technology company, we've seen some customers use request and have some success with paper references. So especially if you're an organization going from paper to digital, it can be kind of a security blanket or a comfort to have, even if it's a quick reference, like a one-pager or even a small note card that has just some references that are important to your mobile tech or maybe things you saw your field staff struggle with in the training. It can help provide be a security blanket for when they're very first going out into the field. But even more so than that, I think clearly communicated steps of recourse. So letting your field staff know, something goes wrong, it's going to be okay. We have these processes put in place to help you and support you and get you back to work. So whether that be, my phone got ran over by a matatu and, I'm not going to be able to do my work for the rest of the day, what should that field officer do? And so incorporating that into the training and maybe having those support processes published somewhere, if not on a paper reference. Also planning for edge cases and worst case scenarios, which kind of incorporates that last bullet point as well. So again, it comes back to the budget issues. It's not easy to purchase devices that maybe aren't immediately going to be used, but again, the ROI and being prepared and making the investment upfront, I think, is definitely worth it. So things are going to happen. Devices are going to be dropped and broken. So having backup devices ready to backfill your field staff is important to keep them moving and to make sure that ensure the success of your field staff's adoption. And that is it. That's all I had today, unless anybody has anything else they'd like to add.
Yeah, we have someone from the Grameen Foundation Latin America team. Maybe I'll just read it out, Carlos. The Grameen Foundation Latin America team has experience working with Samsung tablets, and in this moment we're using Lenovo tablets, and everything's going very good with both. So it looks like Samsung's
Awesome.
and Lenovo's.
Yes, thanks so much for that, Carlos. That's actually feedback we also got from 2 different audience members at ICT for D2 was an endorsement for Samsung tablets. If any of you are using them already, they're kind of, I think they're kind of delicate looking, but the feedback that we got back from the audience was that they're actually pretty durable, and they've had them in the field for, I believe, um, one of the attendees was saying for a year and a half without any issues, or having to maintain or bring any of them in. So that is another, Carlos, you're the third person to endorse Samsung tabs for field staff. Okay, great. Anything else?
Let me, I have a couple questions, Erin, just from the presentation. So at the very beginning, you mentioned kind of communicating the value of technology. I think this was in buy-in. But what are good ways that people have done this? Like, how do you suggest different ways of communicating the value?
Sure. I think talking in the context of what's important to the audience, and contextualizing that and adjusting yourself for the audience is important. So when it comes to field staff, what is important to them? Do they want to, are they overloaded? Do they want to do their work in less time? Or, are they really passionate about the mission? So, you know, talking to them about how they're going to deliver more impact with their work using this technology. Some other actually interesting conversations that we had at the conference where people were also incentivizing the field staff, and that they were allowing them to use the devices personally as well. So a lot of devices come loaded with Facebook and WhatsApp and other non-work applications, and that they said was contributing, they thought was contributing to the adoption of their field staff to the devices themselves, because they were new to smartphones. So I thought that was an interesting way to gain buy-in. We also have customers that completely lock down their phones, so there are applications that you can install on the devices such that you specifically cannot use non-work productive applications. So I've seen people go both ways, but I think in general, the buy-in messaging should be in the context of the audience and what's important to them. I don't know if that answers the question, Lane.
Yeah, actually that got me thinking of also another story of one of our clients. They actually started giving kind of certifications out to their field staff to say, like, if you go through this training, you come out with this certification. That way you can share it to, if you move on to another position, that's like, a point of pride it became. So it was, that also helped with, I think, the buy-in. I thought that was interesting. Another question I had was, you mentioned that the owner should be part of the product selection process. So like whoever owns the actual implementation and the trainings, they should ideally be part of that initial product selection process. But I think it's very common that someone might transition or come on later, and so they were not part of that initial decision making. So in that case, for like if someone comes in later or like transitions, how do you find someone who can be a good owner?
Sure. I think if you can still find a person with all those qualities that we talked about, let me scroll back up, but they weren't a part of the selection process, I think engaging them, maybe if the product's already selected, that ship is already sailed, engaging them on their feedback and opinions on where you're going to go with that technology could help with buy-in as well. But also, I think just thorough communication of why the product was selected could help.
Okay, great. Cool. I think that's it. I don't see any other hands. Last chance for questions. I think Erin is a wealth of knowledge, so do take this chance to kind of pick her brain if you're one of the half who is thinking about implementing in the next 6 months. Or feel free to follow up with us afterwards. Happy to chat one-on-one about rollout strategies as well.
Elaine, I did see a question come through. I'm trying to get back to it about whether or not our app is compatible with Windows phones.
Oh yeah,
I'm
I did. Yeah, I
not sure.
responded separately, but yeah, you
Okay.
can address that.
Okay. Yeah. Well, we're an Android-only application at this point. Just to answer the question. Okay. Great. Does anyone else have any other questions or insights?
Looks like we have one more. I'd love to learn more about how the organization that did a certification for field users. This would be very popular in Haiti. Yeah, Erica, so this was, I think it was, actually I don't want to misspeak. I don't remember who it was exactly, but we were kind of talking about a recent implementation, and they said that it was really really useful. So it was actually like a paper certificate that they printed up and had everyone's kind of name printed out at the end of the training session. I think, yeah, it was at the end of the training session. And they said that the feedback was, I think they were kind of very open, like, hey, we're probably not doing this for our entire career, but we might move around, and this will be really helpful when we do that. I don't know what other details. I don't remember any other details, but yeah, it was kind of like it was actually a like a paper physical certificate. Happy to follow up with you afterwards, Erica.
All right. Great. If there aren't any other more comments or questions, thank you everyone for joining. Our contact information is listed here. If you have any other questions about these topics or things you'd like to share or are interested in our product, you can email us at hello@terreworks.org. We also have a website, YouTube channel, and then if you're already using our product, there's information on our support site around different topics on the application. And that's it. Thank you everyone for joining. Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Erin.
Bye guys.